I would prefer you do the justice of saying exactly what it is you do there, and then we'll get into how you got there.
Absolutely. So I'm an assistant professor of orthopedics, formerly molecular pharmacology and physiology. My specialty is in the development of new drugs, primarily drugs from natural sources and infections. I work with the development of technologies that, for example, allow you to detect an infection a lot faster. Why the heck is that even important? Right? Consider that if you truly go into a hospital and look at the inner workings, you will see that, for example, it takes 14 days to truly diagnose an infection.
Sure.
Right? In the day and age where we have what we call multi-drug resistant pathogens, what the heck does that mean? It just means bacteria that are resistant to a massive amount of antibiotics. Consider that new antibiotics have not really been produced since the 90s. And even before that, we went the synthetic route, which didn't quite work out so well for us.
Why is that?
Well, consider that, for example, and I'll give you a nice little segue. One of my earliest discovery, was finding this new antibiotic that happened to be inside of a tunicate. It's just like a little sea creature that happened to be found in an underground volcano under Antarctica.
Okay.
Now, this is a heck of a reach, right?
Sure.
Right? And this particular single bacteria, which is one bacteria that we found in there, we managed to culture and propagate into trillions of bacteria. And this bacteria happened to produce this particular compound that we then sort of teased out little by little, identified, and it became one of the first antibiotics for what everybody now knows as MRSA.
The bacterial disease? Is that what it is?
That's the one.
That's it.
If you haven't gotten it, it's usually just a matter of time, especially for people like us that are in the gym at all times and rubbing skin with one another as we roll. So that happens to be part of that equation. So we as you know, a lot of those drugs were in the early days. Aspirin were all produced from natural sources, and they were unique molecules. At some point, the big companies decided, hey, we got chemists. Why don't we just change a little bit of that molecule? And now we have 13 new antibiotics with a fraction of the cost and a fraction of the work. Of course, bacteria are not dummies. They've been around, forever and ever for a reason. So they adapted mechanisms to overcome these new antibiotics. Like, hey, I recognize a lot of that molecule, but you sort of change an ear of it. So I still know who you are.
Sure.
So, of course, what happened is that we started having resistance mount up. That resistance carry over to the hospital. Once things are in the hospital, everybody's going to get them. If you want an infection, you go to a hospital.
Right.
Because that's what they are, right? So that trend continued. At some point, you sort of saw antibacterial everything. Good Lord, antibacterial toothpaste, hand soap, you named it. So this added to this pressure of bacteria to adapt. And they did. They did extremely well, extremely fast. So we eventually went on to what the World Health Organization calls the post-antibiotic age. And what that imagined was a time when there were no more antibiotics. Now, it sounds crazy, right? But the reality is that we, in a matter of 3 or 4 years, this is like 2012 to 2015, we went from, we have a gene that was discovered in a pig farm in China. And as you know, the farm industry utilizes a massive amount of antibiotics because they produce a lot of meat.
Sure.
And the animals are in close contact. To following that gene now to Europe and then Canada. And before we knew it, we had bacteria that were resistant to not only 1 or 2 antibiotics. Within 3 years of that, a female came to Las Vegas and had a bacteria in her, bacterial infection, that happened to be resistant to every single antibiotic that the CDC had in its arsenal.
Wow.
So we went from single resistance, multi-resistance, to now we call pan-resistance. These are bacteria that are, in essence, resistant to everything we got. They're death sentences. So it is my job to not only come up with faster way of diagnosing. You may not have 14 days if you have an infection. To faster way of diagnosing it, faster way to prevent the bacteria from adhering. Let's say you get a broken limb. It happens, right? And we have to go in there and fix it. Put rods, put plaques, et cetera, in there. So we have coatings. We have developed coatings that in essence act a force field. And these coatings prevent the bacteria from attaching. Once the bacteria attaches, we have a problem.
Right.
We all have a problem. You have to go back. We have to go back in there. We have to clean it up. We're gonna do a terrible job on it because you can't clean up everything perfectly, especially when it's inside of you.
Right.
And usually, what happens is recurrent infections. So we have these coatings that prevent that. Encourage the growth of new bone, literally right on top of that, and prevent the bacterial adherence. So we have focused on those two ends of things, while at the same time producing new antibiotics the way that we used to when they worked.
So now, is there a focus on creating antibiotics to combat these other bacteria that are resistant to all these antibiotics? Is that a little bit more of the focus?
In my lab, yes,
Okay.
but you'll be surprised that at the industrial level, this is not a concern because antibiotics don't make money, right? So in the time of Viagra, blockbuster drugs are the way to go, and an antibiotic that everybody needs, that you're gonna say, hey, if everybody needs it, it should probably be available for free or for very cheaply.
Sure.
Right? Companies don't quite deal with if it doesn't make money, it's not appealable. It's not where we're sort of we gotta please the investors.